Chapter 1, The Forbidden Glimpse. The star cruiser Veyrana was alive with a low, steady hum, its engines vibrating faintly through the deck plates. Human engineer Daniel Cole moved cautiously along the metallic corridor, his boots making barely a sound. The walls curved in smooth arcs of silver and cobalt, etched with alien glyphs that pulsed faintly as though the ship itself breathed. He wasn't supposed to be here. The restricted wing was guarded by 2 centuries earlier, but Daniel had timed their rotation during his countless late-night maintenance checks. Curiosity had dragged him past the threshold, curiosity, and something he couldn't quite name. A sound reached him, a rhythm of steel scraping stone, sharp and deliberate, not mechanical, not the noise of engines or hydraulics, but something older, ritualistic. He followed it down the narrow passage, where faint red light bled from a half-open door. Inside, the chamber was a different world. No sterile walls, no gleaming tech. Only firelight from a brazier that cast shadows against stone slabs arranged in a circle. Alien runes glowed faintly on the floor, marking patterns he couldn't decipher. The air smelled of burned herbs, sharp and metallic, stinging his nose. And at the center, Commander Shaari. She was stripped of her usual black combat armor, clad only in bands of leather across her chest and waist. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly under the firelight, every muscle taut and defined. Across her arms and torso ran scars, some healed, some still raw, each cut deliberate, marked with dark pigment. She dragged a serrated blade across a stone, the sparks illuminating her fierce, angular face. Her 4 eyes, usually cold and unreadable on the command deck, were closed in focus as she painted war stripes across her body with a blackened brush dipped in ash. Daniel froze in the doorway, his breath catching. He hadn't meant to spy. He had wanted to see what the Zeldar warriors did beyond their drills, to glimpse what humanity could not access. But what he saw wasn't just ritual. It was intimacy, vulnerability, the raw truth of what Mayer feared across the stars. The blade stopped. Her ears twitched. Her eyes snapped open, all 4 of them, blazing in eerie synchronicity, catching the faintest flicker of movement in the shadows. "Human," she hissed. Daniel's blood ran cold. He stumbled back, hands raised instinctively. "I didn't mean to." Shaari moved with terrifying speed. In a breath, she had crossed the room, seizing him by the throat with one clawed hand and slamming him against the cold bulkhead. The force rattled his teeth. "You dare," she growled, breath hot and carrying the tang of bitter herbs. "You intrude on the Rite of Blades? This chamber is sacred. To watch uninvited is to spit upon my ancestors." Daniel gasped, his hands clawing at her iron grip. "I wasn't spying. I just heard the sound. I wanted to understand." His voice was hoarse, words scraping past her fingers on his throat. Her eyes narrowed, studying him with predatory calm. "Understand? You think the rites of warriors are for your curiosity? For human eyes that cannot even grasp honor?" She squeezed, just enough to make the edges of his vision spark with black. Daniel forced himself to meet her gaze. His heart thundered, but he swallowed down fear. "No, not curiosity. Respect. I've never seen anyone carry strength like you do. I couldn't walk away." That gave her pause. The hand at his throat trembled, not from weakness, but hesitation. She searched his face, perhaps expecting mockery or lust. Instead, she found sincerity in his trembling jaw, in the way he fought to stay upright despite the crushing weight of her hold. Her voice dropped, low and dangerous. "You risk death for a glimpse of my scars? For words you cannot begin to mean." Daniel swallowed hard, forcing air into his lungs as she loosened her grip. "Maybe I don't understand all your rights, but where I come from, scars aren't shameful. They're stories. Proof someone lived through fire and kept standing. I saw yours, and I couldn't look away. The chamber fell silent, save the crackle of the brazier. Shaari's grip eased slightly, her expression shifting, though still carved from steel. For the first time, Daniel saw not just a warrior commander, but the flicker of something uncertain behind those 4 eyes. "Foolish human," she whispered, almost to herself. Then her claws released him, and he collapsed to his knees, coughing. But before he could rise, 2 armored guards burst into the chamber, their weapons drawn. "Commander!" We heard disturbance. Shaari snapped her head toward them, her face once more the mask of command. "He trespassed during my rite," she said coldly, pointing to Daniel. "Take him. He will answer before the council." The guards seized him, hauling him to his feet. Daniel locked eyes with her one last time, desperate to read the truth of her reaction. She held his gaze for a fraction longer than necessary, then turned away, blade in hand, resuming her ritual as though he were already condemned. The hum of the Starship engines followed him as he was dragged into the corridor, a steady, metallic heartbeat echoing his fate. Chapter 2, Trial of Shame. The council chamber of the Veyrana was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. A great dome of obsidian metal stretched high above, laced with veins of glowing silver that pulsed like arteries carrying the ship's lifeblood. At the center, an elevated ring of stone and steel circled a pit where the accused stood. Alien glyphs shimmered across the walls, flickering with faint blue fire. The air was heavy with incense, bitter and sharp, clinging to the back of his throat. Daniel's wrists were bound in bands of hardened alloy, thrumming faintly with magnetic locks. He stood in the pit alone, his boots planted on the cold metal floor as dozens of alien eyes stared down at him from the seats above. The Zeldar Council sat in crescent rows, their elongated frames draped in ceremonial armor, blades resting across their laps. Their eyes glowed faintly red in the dim light, every gaze pinning him like a knife. And at the forefront, Commander Shaari. She stood tall, armored once again, her war paint still streaked across her face. Her voice carried to the chamber like steel dragged across stone. "This human intruded upon my right of blades," she declared. "An act forbidden, punishable by exile or death under our code. He dared to watch what only warriors may witness." A murmur spread across the council, their guttural voices echoing. Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. Every instinct screamed at him to stay silent, to let this pass. But silence had never been his strength. One elder, his skin a dull shade of violet, leaned forward. "Human," he said, voice heavy with disdain, "do you deny the charge?" Daniel raised his head, his pulse racing. "No, I don't deny it." The words made the chamber erupt in growls and hisses. "But I didn't enter to mock or defy your right. I heard something. I followed it. And when I saw her, I couldn't turn away." "You admit guilt, yet seek mercy?" another snarled. "No." Daniel's voice cracked, but he pressed on, lifting his chin. "I don't ask for mercy. I only want you to understand. Where I come from, rituals are hidden in books, in history. They're studied, not lived. But your people, you wear your honor on your skin. I wanted to understand that strength, to see what makes you unbreakable." The words hung in the air. Some counselors sneered. One spat on the ground below, but others shifted in their seats, watching him more closely. Shaari's eyes burned into him, unreadable. "Respect?" she said, the word sharp on her tongue. "You call this respect human? To peer upon my scars like some spectacle?" Daniel's jaw tightened. His heart hammered, so loud he swore they could hear it. "Not spectacle. Proof. Proof you bled and endured. Proof that even the strongest aren't untouched. That makes you real. That makes you more." For a heartbeat, silence. Then the chamber erupted again, some in outrage, others in low murmurs. The council split visibly, half calling for punishment, half whispering doubts. An elder banged his staff against the floor, sending a resonant boom across the hall. Enough! Commander Shaari, you are victim of this intrusion. What sentence do you demand? The weight of the room shifted to her. Every gaze turned. Daniel's stomach dropped as Shaari stepped forward, her armor clinking faintly. She looked down at him, this fragile human with too much honesty in his eyes. Her words were slow, deliberate, her gaze unflinching. Death would be too swift, exile too merciful. If the human wishes to understand the weight of scars, let him bear it. The council stirred, confused. Shaari's lips curled in something like disdain, though her eyes flickered with something deeper. Bind him to me. For one full cycle, he will serve as my attendant. He will live my routine, endure my trials, obey my command. If he survives, he will know what it means to look upon a warrior's right. If he fails, he dies not by my hand, but by weakness. A ripple of shock spread across the chamber. No human had ever been bound under such terms. The presiding elder studied her carefully. You would risk dishonor by keeping him in your presence? Shaari's voice was a blade. Better he suffer under me than rot in silence. Let his curiosity be his punishment. The elder considered, then struck the staff once more. So be it. The sentence is passed. The human belongs to you, Commander Shaari, until the cycle ends, or until death claims him. The guards yanked Daniel forward, removing his restraints. His arms were raw where the alloy had pressed into skin, but he barely felt it. His eyes stayed locked on Shaari's. She looked down at him as though he were already broken. Yet behind her rigid mask, he caught the faintest flicker of something else. Uncertainty, maybe even interest. Daniel forced a bitter smile, his voice rough. Guess I'll be seeing a lot of you, Commander. Her gaze hardened, and she turned away without a word. But as the guards dragged him from the chamber, the hum of the Veyrana vibrating through his bones, Daniel realized this wasn't the end of his trial. It was a beginning. Chapter 3, Shackles and Sparks. The barracks of the Zeldar warriors smelled of ire and oil, layered with a faint tang of burned ozone from energy weapons. Metallic bunks lined the chamber like teeth in a predator's jaw, every surface polished to a dull sheen. Alien banners hung from the ceiling, each marked with sigils that shimmered faintly when the ship's artificial gravity pulsed. Daniel stood there, awkwardly human in his plain engineering jumpsuit, while every warrior I watched him with thinly veiled contempt. Shaari entered behind him, her boots ringing against the deck. She gestured to him with one sharp movement. "This is the trespasser," she announced, her four eyes narrowing. "He belongs to me until the cycle ends. You will treat him as you would a servant, but know this. If he falters, if he dishonors me, I will end him myself." The warriors growled their approval, some laughing, others sneering. Daniel's fist tightened, but he kept his head high. "Strip him," Shaari ordered. Daniel froze. "Excuse me." Her gaze cut through him like a blade. "You wear the garb of engineers. Useless cloth. You will wear what I give you, nothing more." Two warriors advanced, their clawed hands snatching at his sleeves. Daniel shoved one back instinctively, earning a chorus of snarls. Shaari stepped forward, her presence alone halting the scuffle. "Interesting," she murmured, her voice dangerously calm. "The human resists." Daniel straightened, meeting her eyes. "I'm not a thing to be dressed up for your amusement." Her lips curled into something between a smirk and a snarl. "Then prove you are not a thing." She tossed a bundle at his chest. It landed heavy in his arms. A black harness, simple but practical, with reinforced boots and leather bracers. Warrior trainee garb. He hesitated only a moment before pulling it on. The material was rough against his skin, the boots heavier than anything he'd worn. But when he straightened, he caught a flicker of surprise in Shaari's eyes. He looked less like an out-of-place mechanic, more like someone about to step into fire. "Good," she said at last. "Then you will train." The training yard was a hollow chamber at the ship's edge, shielded by translucent barriers that revealed the endless stretch of space beyond. Stars burned bright against the void, their cold light bathing the floor in ghostly silver. Shaari thrust a blunt practice staff into his hands. "Defend yourself." Daniel barely had time to grip it before she lunged. The blow came fast and hard, slamming into his ribs. He staggered, pain exploding through his side. Laughter erupted from the watching warriors. "Pathetic!" One jeered. Shaari circled him, her movements fluid, every muscle coiled with predatory grace. "Stand human. You wanted to understand strength? Here it is." Daniel gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright. His chest burned, but he raised the staff, adjusting his stance. She struck again, this time aiming low. He stumbled but swung wildly, the staff cracking against her shin. The chamber went silent. Shaari froze, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she straightened. A thin line of amusement tugged at her lips. "You strike back." Daniel panted, sweat beading his brow. "I don't know how to quit." For the first time, something flickered in her gaze, not mockery, but the faintest spark of respect. The session dragged on for what felt like hours. Daniel was bruised, his muscles screaming, but he refused to collapse. Each strike he took left him staggering, but he always rose. By the end, his arms shook so badly he could barely hold the staff, yet he was still standing. Shaari called the session to a halt. She stepped close, looming over him. The firelight from the distant stars gleamed across her scars, the same ones he'd seen in secret. "You are weak," she said, her voice low, "but weaker ones than you have broken already. You remain." Daniel spat blood to the side, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Guess you'll just have to hit harder." For a moment, the warriors watched, waiting for Shaari's wrath. But instead of striking, she turned sharply, her voice carrying to all present. "He endures," she declared. "Mock him again and mock my judgment." The warriors fell silent. Daniel, battered and aching, felt a strange warm flicker in his chest. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even survival. It was a first hint that maybe, just maybe, he had carved a sliver of space for himself in a world that wanted him crushed. Shaari's eyes lingered on him longer than before. Then she turned, her tone clipped. "Clean yourself, human. Tomorrow you learn to bleed properly." Daniel exhaled slowly, staring out at the stars beyond the barrier. They burned cold and endless. But for the first time since the sentencing, he felt something flicker deep inside him. Hope. Chapter 4, The Clash of Blades. The training arena aboard of Veyrana was alive with sound. The hiss of energy barriers, the hum of gravity stabilizers, and the low rumble of warriors gathering. Metallic steps echoed as Shaari led Daniel to the center, where the floor was marked with glowing runes that shimmered faintly with each footfall. Beyond the barrier, the stars stretched like cold witnesses, their light filtering into the chamber. Daniel tightened the wraps around his hands, his knuckles raw from the past weeks. His ribs still ached from yesterday's drills. But he forced himself to straighten, to look less like prey before the alien audience. He could feel their eyes, for a time luminous and cold, boring into him from the stands. Shaari's voice cut through the murmur. "Today, the human will spar. He will prove whether endurance is all he possesses, or if there is something more." She gestured, and a warrior stepped forward, taller than Daniel by a head. The alien bore scars across her arms and wielded a bladed staff that glowed faintly with electric current. She slammed it against the floor, sending sparks across the runes. Daniel swallowed. His weapon was a simpler staff, wooden heavy, splintering from overuse. No glow, no hum of energy, just a stick in his human hands. The warrior sneered. This is no duel. This is slaughter. Shaari's gaze flicked to Daniel. Begin. The first strike came fast, too fast. The alien lunged. The blade sliced in the air where Daniel's neck had been a breath ago. He dropped, rolling awkwardly across the floor, the runes flaring under his back. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel scrambled to his feet, staff raised, his heart hammered, sweat already stinging his eyes. The warrior stalked forward, each step a predator's rhythm. The second strike nearly shattered his defense. The bladed staff slammed against his, sparks flying as the shock vibrated up his arms. Pain seared through his bones. His grip almost failed. Almost. Clumsy, the alien hissed. Daniel spat blood from a split lip, forcing a grin. Clumsy, still standing. She roared and swung again, this time low. Daniel leapt back, barely dodging, then lunged forward, swinging his staff in a desperate arc. It cracked against her thigh. She staggered, just a fraction, but enough to silence the laughter in the stands. Daniel's chest heaved. He'd landed a hit, a small one, but it was proof. The warrior's eyes burned. With a snarl, she attacked a flurry, blows raining down like hammer strikes. Daniel blocked what he could, took the rest on his shoulders, his ribs, his arms. His body screamed with pain, but he refused to fall. Each time she knocked him down, he clawed his way back up, bruised and shaking but upright. At last, one savage strike sent his staff spinning from his hands. It clattered across the floor, out of reach. The alien raised her glowing blade, ready to deliver the final blow. "Yield!" a voice barked. Not Daniel's. Shaari's. The warrior froze mid-swing, eyes narrowing. "Commander?" Shaari's gaze was fixed on Daniel, who stood unarmed, chest heaving, blood dripping down his chin. Yet he remained on his feet, fists clenched, glaring up at his opponent with defiance that radiated louder than words. "He does not yield," Shaari said, her tone steady, resonant. "Look at him. No training, no strength by our standards, no blade worthy of the name. And still he rises, still he strikes. That is not weakness." The chamber went silent. Even the hum of the stabilizers seemed to dim. Daniel wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand and forced a ragged smile. "You'll have to hit harder." A ripple moved through the warriors. Not laughter this time, not mockery. Something else. Respect. Shaari stepped forward, retrieving his discarded staff. She offered it back to him, not as a commander handing down punishment, but as something closer to acknowledgement. Daniel hesitated, then took it. Their hands brushed for the briefest moment, the contact sparking something unspoken between them. Shaari turned to the assembled warriors. "Mock him again, and you mock me. He has earned his place in this arena. He has endured." The council of warriors bowed their heads, some grudgingly, others with growing curiosity. Daniel sagged, his muscles trembling, but inside he felt something bloom like fire. Not victory, not acceptance, something better. He was no longer just a trespasser, no longer just a human sentenced to servitude. For the first time, he was seen. Chapter 5. Beneath the armor. The Veyrana drifted through a stretch of unlit space, its engines pulsing a steady heartbeat that thrummed through the decks. Daniel sat cross-legged in the maintenance bay, working a jagged dent out his training staff. His knuckles were split and his arms sore, but there was a small satisfaction in smoothing wood with his own hands instead of relying on alien fabricators. Above him, neon blue emergency strips flickered once, then again. The hum of the engine shifted. a subtle tremor that crawled down his spine. Daniel paused. He'd been on ships long enough to recognize that sound. Stress in the hull. Trouble. Then the alarms began to howl. A voice thundered over the intercom, guttural and sharp. Raiders! Breach on Deck 12. The bay erupted in chaos. Warriors armed themselves in seconds, rushing toward the doors. The scent of heated metal and ion charge filled the air as rifles and blades powered up. Daniel snatched his staff and sprinted after them, heart pounding, though he had no real place among soldiers. The corridor outside was already a battlefield. Sparks rained from ruptured conduits. The light strobe red, and the ship groaned as hull plating buckled under enemy fire. Alien raiders poured through a torn hatch. Lanky, insectoid creatures with jagged mandibles and barbed rifles. Their screeches cut through the air like broken metal. Daniel stumbled into the fray, ducking behind a scorched support beam. His pulse roared in his ears. This wasn't sparring. This wasn't training. This was real. Through the chaos, he saw her. Shaari fought like fire given form, her 4 eyes alight, her serrated blade carving arcs of silver light. She moved with terrifying grace, cutting through raiders 2 at a time. But even she could not fight everywhere at once. A blast from a raider rifle struck the wall beside her, showering sparks, and another warrior's body crashed into her, forcing her against a bulkhead. Daniel's body reacted before his mind did. He ran. A raider aimed its barbed rifle at Shaari's exposed side. Daniel leapt, slamming his staff against the weapon's barrel. The force knocked it askew just as it fired, the shot searing into the ceiling. The recoil jolted his arms numb, but he didn't stop. He swung again, catching the raider's jaw with a crack that sent it reeling. Shaari twisted free, her blade flashing, finishing the creature in one clean strike. She whirled on Daniel, breath heaving. For an instant, anger flared in her eyes. Then she froze. Blood streaked down his arm. Shrapnel from the blast had torn into his flesh. But Daniel stood firm, gripping the staff like a lifeline. His chest rose and fell in ragged gasps, yet his gaze never left hers. "Get up," he panted. "I've got your back." For a moment, all sound seemed to dim. The alarms, the gunfire, the screams of dying raiders. There was only the human, bruised and bleeding, refusing to abandon her side. Shaari's jaw clenched. Something in her armor cracked. Not the metal plates, but the cold, impassive mask she wore. She stepped closer, covering him with her blade as more raiders surged. Together they fought, her strikes precise and devastating, his desperate and wild. Where she carved a path, he filled the gaps, blocking, shoving, swinging with all the stubborn fury in him. By the time reinforcements arrived, the deck was littered with broken bodies, smoke curling in the air. The raiders retreated, shrieking as they were driven back through the torn hatch. The emergency bulkheads slammed shut with a final clang. Daniel staggered, his knees threatening to give out. Shaari caught him before he fell, her clawed hand steadying his shoulder. He winced but didn't pull away. "You are wounded," she said, her voice low. Not the sharp command of a warrior, but something quieter. Daniel managed a crooked smile. "You should see the other guy." Her 4 eyes searched his face, lingering longer than they ever had. She had seen countless warriors fight, seen them bleed and die. But this human, this fragile creature, had thrown himself between her and death without hesitation. Later, in the med bay, Shaari stood over him as alien medics sealed his wounds with glowing resin. His jaw was tight with pain, but he didn't make a sound. She stared at the scars forming across his skin, new marks to add to the ones she carried. Scars not from ritual, but from loyalty. She reached out, fingers brushing his arm as though testing if he was real. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You are not what I thought." Daniel tilted his head toward her, eyes heavy but steady. Guess that makes two of us. For the first time, Shaari looked at him not as a trespasser, not as a servant, but as something she could not name, something that unsettled her more than any. Chapter 6, Ritual of Equals. The Veyrana was quiet after the raid. Its long halls thrummed with the low hum of repaired engines, but the usual clatter of warriors was muted. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt the ship breathe, not with fury or discipline, but with something close to exhaustion. He should have been resting. The resin seal across his wound still burned, and his muscles ached from days of relentless drills. Yet when Shaari appeared at the doorway of the med bay, her 4 eyes fixed on him, he felt every trace of weariness vanish. "Come," she said simply. Her tone was not command, not mockery, something else. Daniel followed her through winding corridors he had never been allowed to walk before. The air grew cooler, sharper, as though touched by currents that didn't belong to the ship. Strange glyphs shimmered across the walls, their light shifting as they passed. He felt them buzz faintly in his bones. Finally, they entered a chamber unlike any he had seen. The walls were carved stone rather than alloy, the floor inlaid with concentric circles of glowing runes. At the center stood a shallow pool, its water black as obsidian, but shot through with faint silver currents, like starlight caught beneath the surface. Braziers burned at the edges, releasing a heady scent of charred herbs that stung his throat and made the air shimmer. Shaari stepped into the circle and turned to him. Her armor was gone, replaced by simple ritual garb, bands of leather, her skin marked with ash and paint. The scars along her arms and chest caught the light, each line telling its story. "This place is forbidden to all but warriors who have bound themselves to another," she said, her voice carrying a weight that pressed on his chest. "It is where we perform the Rite of Equals. To enter is to risk exile if unworthy." Daniel's throat tightened. "Then why bring me here?" Her gaze lingered on him, sharp and uncertain. "Because you stood between me and death. Because you bled when you could have fled. Because I see in you something my own kind does not." She paused, her jaw clenched. "But if I perform this rite with human, my council will strip me of command. I will be cast out." The words hung heavy in the chamber. Daniel's chest ached, not from wounds, but from the gravity of her confession. He took a step closer, the silver-lit water reflecting in his eyes. "Then don't," he whispered. "Don't risk everything for me. I'm not worth your exile." Her eyes narrowed, but not in anger, more like disbelief. "You tell me to choose safety? Even now?" Daniel swallowed, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Because where I come from, the strongest thing a person can do isn't to win every battle. It's to protect what matters most. And I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." Silence. The water rippled faintly, though no wind stirred it. Then Shaari stepped forward, so close the heat of her body cut through the chill of the chamber. She raised her clawed hand, then, slowly, carefully, pressed it against his chest, just above his heart. "You speak of strength as if it is choice," she murmured, "but you do not see what I see. My people trained to obey, to endure, to kill. You, human, you act without hesitation, without calculation. You throw yourself into fire and call it loyalty." Her 4 eyes softened, something breaking through the steel of her mask. "That is strength I have never known." Daniel's breath caught. Her hand lingered, the tips of her claws resting just shy of piercing his skin. He raised his own hand and, after a moment's hesitation, laid it gently over hers. "What happens if we do this?" he asked quietly. Her voice was a whisper, reverent and dangerous. "We are bound. Our scars are shared. My honor becomes yours. Your fate becomes mine. We fight as one or fall as one." The air seemed to vibrate, the runes glowing brighter. Daniel's heart hammered, but he didn't look away. "Then I'm in," he said, his voice steady. Shaari's eyes widened, not in shock, but in something Daniel couldn't name. She guided him into the pool. The black water lapped against his legs, cold as space, burning as it touched the resin-sealed wound. He bit back a cry, but she watched him with a flicker of pride. Together, they knelt in the center. She pressed the edge of her ritual blade against her palm, letting dark blood drip into the water. Then she handed him the blade. Daniel hesitated, then drew it across his own palm. Pain flared sharp, hot, but he let the blood fall. The silver currents swirled, binding their offerings together until the water shimmered violet. Shaari spoke words in her tongue, low and guttural, each syllable vibrating through the chamber. Then she looked at him. "Say only this. Never apart, never broken." Daniel swallowed and repeated, his voice rough but certain. "Never apart, never broken." The pool flared with light, surrounding them in a halo of silver and violet. For a moment, Daniel felt the hum of the Starship engines fade, replaced by the beating of two hearts in unison, his and hers. When the light dimmed, Shaari's expression had changed. No longer commander and prisoner, no longer alien and human. Something else, something more. Chapter 7, Betrayal in the Shadows. The Veyrana sailed through the dark sea of stars, her hull scarred from the last raid. Repairs echoed through the ship. Welders hissed. Conduits sparked. The hum of engines pulsed like a heartbeat under strain. To most, it was a sound of survival. To Daniel, it was a sound of change. Ever since the Rite of Equals, nothing felt the same. He walked the halls and felt alien eyes following him, not with scorn alone, but with wary curiosity. He wasn't simply the trespasser anymore. He was a human who had bled beside their commander, the one Shaari had bound herself to. That alone was enough to breed envy. It began in whispers, warriors muttering as he passed, glances that lingered too long. Daniel had seen the look before back on Earth. Resentment, the kind that boiled just beneath the surface. Here, among a people who prized dominance, it was sharper, deadlier, and it had a face. Ravik, broad-shouldered, scarred, his 4 eyes glowed faint amber beneath the barracks lights. A veteran, older than Shaari, and one who had expected to inherit command after her. He watched Daniel with open contempt, his jaw tight whenever Shaari spoke to human. One cycle after the rite, Daniel returned to barracks to find his cot overturned, his training staff snapped clean in two. A smear of alien blood marked the wall, and a crude symbol Daniel didn't understand, but the meaning was clear, unwanted. Shaari found him standing in the wreckage. Her expression barely flickered, but her claws tightened at her sides. "Ravik," she said, as if naming a wound. Daniel brushed dust from his sleeve, trying to keep his voice steady. "He doesn't like that you chose me." Her eyes darkened. "He would see me bound and no one. He thinks loyalty a weakness." Daniel gave a bitter laugh. "Guess I'm proof of that, huh?" But Shaari didn't answer. The ambush came 3 days later. Daniel was on deck 9, hauling supplies for repairs, when the alarm screamed again. Raiders! He dropped the crate, the echo of his boots ringing as he sprinted for the armory, only to find the corridor ahead empty. Too empty. A shadow loomed. Ravik stepped from the side passage, blade in hand, mandibles set in a cruel grin. The human runs to war? Pathetic. You shame her by standing at her side. Daniel's stomach twisted. Move. Instead, Ravik pressed closer, his voice a growl. "The raiders breached at deck 10. I told the guards you would cover it alone. By the time she finds you, you'll be nothing but meat. Her honor dies with you." Daniel's blood chilled. It wasn't just envy. It was betrayal. Behind them, the sound of claws scraped against the floor. Raiders, Their mandibles clacking, spilled into the corridor, their rifles glowing with charged energy. Ravik shoved Daniel forward into their path and turned away. "Wait!" Daniel shouted, but Ravik vanished into the shadows. The first bolt sizzled past Daniel's head. He dove behind a bulkhead, heart hammering. His staff was gone, shattered days ago. All he had was his body, his fists, and the stubborn refusal to die. He grabbed a loose conduit pipe from the wall, sparks biting into his palms, and swung as the first raider lunged. The makeshift weapon cracked against its mandible, sending it sprawling. Another fired, the blast grazing his shoulder, the heat searing through cloth and skin. Pain flared, but he didn't fall. "Not here," Daniel growled through gritted teeth. "Not like this." Then the corridor shook with a new sound, a war cry guttural and sharp. Shaari burst from the far passage, her blade blazing, her presence like a storm unleashed. Her eyes widened as she saw him, bloodied, fighting with nothing but a sparking pipe. "Daniel!" Relief surged through him, followed by terror as 3 raiders closed in behind her. He staggered forward, swinging wildly, just enough to distract them. Shaari cut through the rest with terrifying grace, her blade cleaving, her movements faster than his eyes could follow. In moments, the corridor was silent, save for Daniel's ragged breathing. Shaari rushed to his side, grabbing his arm before he collapsed. Her voice was low, almost breaking. "You should be dead." Daniel winced, forcing a crooked grin, despite the blood on his lips. "Takes more than betrayal and bugs to finish me." Her eyes flared at the word. "Betrayal?" He nodded weakly. "Ravik sent me here. Knew the raiders would come. Wanted me gone." For a heartbeat, silence. Then her jaw set, her grip tightening on his arm as if grounding herself. "He will pay," she whispered. "But not now. Not before the council sees the truth." She lifted him to his feet, half carrying him through the blood-smeared corridor. Daniel leaned against her, the hum of the ship thrumming beneath his feet, his vision fading in and out. Even through the haze of pain, one thought burned clear. She had come for him. She had chosen him over orders, over honor, over safety. And that choice had already changed everything. Chapter 8, Warrior's Oath. The council chamber was heavy with silence. Torches guttered in their sconces, casting jagged shadows across the curved obsidian walls. The elders sat in their crescent ring, weapons lay before them like silent judgments. Warriors lined the perimeter, their 4 eyes fixed on the pit below, where Daniel and Shaari now stood side by side. Daniel's wounds were bandaged, but his face still bore the bruises and cuts of Ravik's betrayal. He stood tall despite the pain, staff in hand once more, rebuilt hastily from scrap and wrapped with cord. It looked pitiful among the gleaming weapons of the Zeldar, but he gripped it as though it were a sword forged in fire. The elder at the center slammed his staff, the sound echoing like thunder. "Commander Shaari, you bring a human into this chamber, wounded and unworthy, and accuse one of your own of betrayal. Explain yourself." Shari's voice carried clear and sharp, cutting through the stillness. Ravik sought to see the human dead. He led him into the path of raiders, then abandoned him. Were it not for his stubbornness of my intervention, we would both be corpses. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, some skeptical, others unsettled. Ravik stepped forward from the shadows, his amber eyes burning. "Lies! She speaks lies to cover her shame. She has bound herself to a human, a fragile creature unfit to serve beside us. She would risk all of Zeldar honor for him." The council erupted in growls, warriors shouting in agreement. Daniel felt the weight of their fury pressing down like gravity. Shaari didn't flinch. She turned, meeting his gaze with all 4 of her eyes. For a moment, Daniel thought she might step back, disavow the bond, retreat into safety. His stomach twisted at the thought. Instead, she raised her chin and faced the council. "Yes," she said, her voice like steel on stone. "I bound myself to him." The chamber fell silent. Shaari stepped closer to Daniel, her claws brushing his arm in a gesture that was both defiant and intimate. "I performed the rite of equals with this human, knowing the cost, knowing exile awaited me. I did it because he has proven what no trial could. Courage without calculation, loyalty without command, strength without arrogance. He has endured where many of my own would falter. He is my equal." The council's silence broke into an uproar. Some shouted for her removal, others for his execution. Ravik roared above them, pointing his blade. "Blasphemy! No human can be equal to a Zeldar warrior." Daniel felt something burn hot in his chest. He stepped forward before Shaari could stop him, his voice raw but steady. "You're right. I'm not one of you. I'm not bred for war, not covered in scars from your rituals. But I bleed. I fight. I stand when everything tells me to stay down. And if that isn't strength, then maybe your people forgot what the word means." The words cut sharper than blades. The chamber stilled. Even the elders leaned forward. Ravik snarled, stepping into the pit. "Then prove it, human. Fight me and show these fools your worth." Shaari moved, but Daniel raised a hand. His staff shook in his grip, his body aching, but his eyes were fierce. "No, if this is the only language you understand, then I'll speak it." The duel was short, brutal. Ravik struck like thunder, his blade crackling with energy. Daniel dodged, blocked, stumbled, his staff splintering under each blow. He took cuts along his arms, his chest, pain flaring with every movement, but he refused to fall. At the final strike, Ravik raised his blade high, roaring. Daniel lunged, not to block, but to close the gap. His staff splintered against Ravik's jaw, sending the alien sprawling. Both fell, but only Daniel rose again, gasping, staff broken in half but still in his hands. The chamber roared with shock. Ravik lay stunned, blood streaking his mandibles. Daniel staggered upright, planting the broken staff into the floor like a banner. "I'm still here," he panted. Shaari stepped forward, placing her clawed hand over his, raising it high. Her voice thundered through the chamber, never apart, never broken. For a moment, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, a few warriors pounded their blades against the floor. One by one, others joined, the sound growing into a resounding chorus. Not all approved, but enough did. The elder staff struck the floor once more. "So it is. The bond stands. Commander Shaari is exiled from tradition, but not from respect. The human has earned his place. Their path is their own." Daniel's knees nearly buckled, but Shaari steadied him. They left the chamber together, the echoes of the warriors' blades following them like thunder. As the doors closed behind them, Daniel leaned into her, exhausted, but smiling. "Guess we're in this together now." Shari's expression softened, the mask of Commander breaking once more. "Together," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Never apart, never broken." The hum of the Veyrana's engines carried them forward, two souls bound across stars, ready to face exile, war, or destiny. Together, the Veyrana drifted silently through the starfield, its scarred hull gleaming faintly in the light of a distant nebula. Within the viewing deck, Daniel stood beside Shaari, their reflections cast across the curved glass. The hum of the engines vibrated beneath their feet, steady and alive, as though the ship itself bore witness to what they had endured. Below them, a planet's neon-lit cities burned bright against the dark, alien voices carrying faintly through the comms as the council announced its judgment. Exiled, cast out from tradition, yet free, Daniel exhaled, his breath fogging the glass for a moment before fading. "Strange," he murmured. I used to think scars were just reminders of mistakes. But now, I think they're proof we lived. Shaari turned, her 4 eyes softer than he'd ever seen them, the fire command tempered into something fiercely human. She reached for his hand, her claws curling carefully around his fingers. "Then let us live many scars together," she said. They stood like that in silence, watching the alien constellations drift past, two figures bound not by duty but by choice, against a galaxy that had tried to tear them apart. They had chosen each other. Daniel squeezed her hand, his voice steady, carrying into the stars. Never apart, never broken. The ship's engines flared, carrying them forward into the unknown, warrior and human, scarred but unyielding, bound by something even the stars could not erase.